I am Catherine, and I am 32 years old. There is a distinct, suffocating silence that fills a room when a toxic family realizes they can no longer afford the fictions they have been peddling. It is not a quiet born of reflection. It is the vacuum of air leaving the lungs of people who just realized the check is due. For my mother, Patricia, that silence cost exactly $42,600. I sat across from her with my hands folded neatly over my lap, watching her process the numbers. The invoice rested on the polished wood between us, printed on crisp, watermarked legal paper. Patricia stared at the itemized charges. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the heavy leather guest chair. Her manicured fingers trembled as they hovered over the hazard pay line item and the compounded daily interest. She searched the document for a punchline that was not there. "You cannot be serious," my father David muttered from the corner of the office. His voice was tight and stripped of its usual booming authority. "Net 30 terms," I replied. My tone was flat, matching the temperature of the frost clinging to the window panes outside. "Unpaid balances incur standard legal penalties. You will find the itemization precise." I am a forensic certified public accountant. My entire career is built on tracking missing assets, untangling corporate fraud, and proving that every lie leaves a paper trail. My parents always viewed my profession as tedious and lacking the flashy, chaotic glamour of my brother Carter and his endless entrepreneurial endeavors. But sitting in that law office, watching the blood drain from my mother's face, they were finally experiencing my expertise firsthand. They expected me to sacrifice my career, my finances, and my home to raise my brother's neglected children while he vacationed overseas. They genuinely believed I would just absorb the burden because they view me as a disposable utility. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their financial illusion and legally seized their assets to pay for my niece's winter coat, welcome to Intimately Told Stories. Please let me know your age and what state you are listening from down in the comments. To understand how we reached this staggering invoice, we have to freeze this moment and rewind exactly 90 days. Before the federal fraud reports and before the bitter custody battle, my life was a sanctuary of calculated order. I live in Vermont, nestled in a restored 19th century farmhouse surrounded by dense maple forests and rolling green hills. I chose this place for its rhythm. The state operates on a slower, deliberate frequency. People here respect boundaries. They survive the harsh winters through preparation, stockpiling firewood and minding their own acreage. My home reflects that philosophy. The original wide plank pine floors are polished. The wood stove is always cleared of ash. My home office, overlooking a quiet, scenic lake, is a fortress of dual monitors, color-coded files, and ergonomic efficiency. 90 days ago, it was early November. The morning air carried that sharp, biting chill that signals the earth freezing over. I was sitting at my desk, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan with a steaming mug of black coffee resting on a slate coaster. I was reviewing a complex corporate ledger. The fourth quarter is the crucible of the accounting world. Corporate audit season was looming, bringing with it mandated 80-hour work weeks, unyielding deadlines, and clients desperate to hide their financial indiscretions before year-end. Failing an audit or missing a filing deadline did not just mean professional embarrassment. It meant risking my firm's reputation and my own partnership track. My margin for error was zero. My schedule was calibrated down to the 15-minute increment. I had no room for surprises, and certainly no space for the hurricane that was about to pull into my driveway. The crunch of tires on gravel broke the morning stillness. I did not have any deliveries scheduled. I pushed my chair back, letting the wheels glide smoothly over the hard wood, and walked toward the front window. Through the frost-laced glass, I saw my parents' silver SUV idling near the porch. The engine was still running, exhaust plumed in thick white clouds in the freezing 20-degree air. My stomach tightened. Patricia and David never visited without a specific agenda, and they never drove 3 hours north just to say hello. I watched as the rear doors opened. Two small figures climbed out into the biting wind. I recognized them instantly. Mason and Harper, my 6-year-old nephew and niece. I grabbed my coat and stepped onto the porch, just in time to see my father pulling two cheap, flimsy suitcases from the trunk. He dropped them unceremoniously onto the frost-covered grass. Patricia marched up the wooden steps. She did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how I was doing. She pointed a finger at me and delivered a mandate disguised as a favor. Carter needs 3 months in Bali for a spiritual awakening, she announced, her breath pluming in the cold. His crypto startup is going through a transition, and he needs to clear his head. It is your duty to watch the twins. You have no life anyway. I stared at her. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the freezing air between us. She was demanding I act as a full-time mother to 2 young children for a quarter of a year. Also, my 35-year-old brother could find himself on a tropical beach. She spoke with a casual dismissiveness, as if my career and my home were merely waiting areas for her golden child's convenience. I looked past her to the children. Mason was hugging his arms to his chest. Harper was rubbing her bare hands together, trying to generate friction. They were wearing paper-thin designer windbreakers, sporting an expensive brand logo, but offering zero insulation against the Vermont winter. It was a perfect representation of Carter's parenting style. He cared deeply about the superficial image, but provided zero actual protection or warmth. I did not scream. I did not argue or beg them to be reasonable. Arguing with my parents is a losing battle because they do not operate in a shared reality. They construct a narrative where they are the victims of their own terrible choices, and anyone who refuses to enable them is the villain. My mother turned around, practically jogging back to the idling SUV. "We will call you when we land back in New York," she called over her shoulder. "Just feed them whatever we do not care about organic nonsense." My father did not even look at me. He climbed into the driver's seat and put the car in gear. The tires spun on the loose gravel, kicking up frozen dirt as they peeled out of my driveway, leaving me standing on the porch with 2 freezing children. I knelt down to the twins' level. Their lips were taking on a pale blue tint. Harper looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Are we staying here, Aunt Katie?" she whispered. Her voice was shaking from the cold. I forced a warm, reassuring smile, pushing down the spike of cold fury rising in my chest. "You are staying with me," I promised, gently. "Let us get inside and make some hot chocolate." I ushered them into the warmth of the farmhouse. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing out the bitter wind. I helped them out of their useless windbreakers and wrapped them in thick fleece blankets by the wood stove. While they sipped from oversized mugs, I walked back into my home office. I glanced up at the corner of the ceiling near the window. A small, sleek camera lens blinked with a steady green light. A year ago, I installed a network of high-definition audio-enabled security cameras around the perimeter of my property. I put them up because Carter used to visit and conveniently pack up my expensive delivered packages in his trunk when he thought no one was looking. He claimed it was always an accident. Today, that camera had captured every single second of my parents abandoning 2 minor children in freezing weather. It recorded my mother's exact words forcing them into my care, and my father speeding away. I sat down at my desk and woke up my laptop. I did not call Carter. He would not answer anyway. I opened my cloud drive and created a new encrypted folder. I titled it Werner Family Audit. I pulled up the security footage from the porch, downloaded the raw video file, and saved it to the folder. Then I opened a blank spreadsheet. If my family wanted to treat my life like a public utility, they were about to learn that my services come at a premium rate. I created 4 distinct columns: date, item description, build cost, Accrued interest. I typed in today's date and logged my first entry. $400 for two heavy, durable, unbranded down parkas from the local outfitter. The meter was officially running. While Mason and Harper huddled close to the radiating heat of the cast iron wood stove, I turned my attention to the luggage my father had abandoned on the frosted grass. I hauled the two flimsy suitcases into the mudroom. The zippers snagged on cheap fabric as I pulled them open. I expected to find a chaotic assortment of children's clothing. Instead, I uncovered a masterclass in parental negligence. There were no sweaters. There were no boots. I pulled out 3 pairs of designer swim trunks, a handful of organic cotton summer t-shirts, and 2 iPad chargers. Nestled beneath a pair of imported linen trousers was a single piece of heavy parchment paper. I unfolded it. The handwriting belonged to my sister-in-law, Lauren. Her elegant looping script detailed a list of dietary restrictions, focused heavily on raw veganism. At the bottom, she added a postscript. Carter and I are taking this quarter to align our energies in Southeast Asia. Please ensure the twins remain unschooled during this transition. Do not force them into the traditional educational matrix. We need them to maintain their free-spirited auras. I stared at the parchment. My brother and his wife were fleeing their mounting financial failures under the guise of a spiritual retreat, and they expected me to facilitate their delusion while serving as an unpaid, full-time governess. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Carter's number. The line did not even ring. A sterile, automated voice immediately informed me that the subscriber was unavailable. He had blocked my number before their flight even took off. I tapped my mother's contact name. She picked up on the second ring. The background noise sounded like the bustling terminal of John F. Kennedy International Airport. "What is it, Catherine?" she snapped. Her tone was sharp and entirely devoid of guilt. "We are waiting to board our connection back to New York." "You left 2 children on my porch in freezing weather with nothing but swimwear," I said. My voice remained level, keeping the emotion strictly quarantined. "I have a fourth-quarter corporate audit starting Monday. I work 60 hours a week. I cannot absorb a spontaneous 3-month unschooling project. You need to turn around and come get them." Patricia let out a sharp, patronizing sigh. It was the exact sound she always used when she felt I was failing to grasp the importance of her golden child. "Carter is under a lot of pressure, Catherine. His crypto venture hit a temporary snag, and he needs a reset. You are single, you have a big, empty house, and you have no life outside of those tedious spreadsheets. Be useful for once instead of being a selfish spinster. It is your duty to step up." Before I could form a response, the line clicked dead. I lowered the phone. I did not throw it against the wall. I did not break down into tears. Crying is an inefficient use of energy, and it does not solve logistical nightmares. Instead, I walked back into my home office, opened my encrypted cloud folder, and added a new tab to my master spreadsheet. I titled it Unauthorized Guardianship Logistics. If they viewed my life as a vacant waiting room for their convenience, they were going to pay the standard corporate rate for the square footage. But the immediate problem was Monday morning. I could not pause a multinational corporate audit to align the free-spirited auras of 2 6-year-olds. I needed them in a structured environment immediately. At 8 o'clock on Monday morning, I drove the twins to the local progressive elementary school in town. The building smelled of pine cleaner and construction paper. I left Mason and Harper sitting quietly on a bench in the main office, reading a picture book, while I stepped into the administration room to speak with Principal Hayes. I sat across from his cluttered desk and explained that I needed to execute an emergency, temporary enrollment for my niece and nephew. I kept the details vague, stating only that my brother was traveling for work and the children would be residing with me for the winter term. Principal Hayes adjusted his glasses and typed their names into his computer. He frowned, tilting his head at the monitor. "Miss Werner," he said slowly, "I am looking at their file right now. They are already enrolled for the winter term." I froze. I kept my posture relaxed, but my mind began racing through the variables. "That is impossible," I replied. "They just arrived in the state on Saturday." Principal Hayes clicked his mouse and turned the monitor toward me. "Your parents submitted the paperwork through our online portal late last week," he explained. "They registered them under your residential address." I stared at the screen. Displayed in crisp digital resolution was a standard Vermont School District affidavit of residency. It stated that Mason and Harper Werner were permanent residents of my physical address. At the bottom of the form, on the line designated for the primary property owner, was my signature. Except I never signed it. I leaned in closer, studying the blue ink loop of the letter K. It was a practiced imitation, but I recognized the distinct hesitation in the curve of the W. It was my mother's handwriting. She had forged my legal signature to bypass the district's strict out-of-state enrollment barriers. My eyes drifted to the second page of the PDF file. It was the required proof of residency attachment. Displayed on the screen was a scanned copy of my Green Mountain Power electric bill from August. A cold, heavy realization washed over me. My parents had visited my farmhouse for a weekend in late August. During that visit, while I was making them dinner, Patricia must have walked down the driveway, opened my physical mailbox, and stolen my utility bill. They had planned this abandonment months in advance. They orchestrated a premeditated scheme to dump Carter's children on me, ensuring the local school would take them off my hands during work hours so I could not claim childcare as an excuse to reject them. This was no longer a toxic family boundary violation. Forging a signature on a government document to assign educational liability was fraud. Stealing a utility bill from a residential mailbox was a federal offense. Principal Hayes was watching me closely, waiting for a reaction. If I told him the document was forged, he would be legally obligated to unenroll the children immediately and flag the file. That would leave me without daytime childcare and put my corporate audit in jeopardy. I offered a tight, practiced smile. "My apologies, Principal Hayes. The transition happened so quickly over the weekend I forgot my mother handled the administrative paperwork for me. Could I perhaps get a printed hard copy of their entire enrollment file for my home records?" Of course, he smiled back, relieved that there was no administrative crisis. I walked out of the school 10 minutes later, holding a manila folder containing documented proof of federal mail theft and identity fraud. My parents thought they were clever. They thought they had trapped me in an inescapable web of familial duty. They did not realize they had just handed a forensic accountant a smoking gun. That evening, the reality of my new existence settled into the quiet farmhouse. I managed to get through a fraction of my corporate tax reviews while the twins colored at the kitchen island. They were remarkably quiet. They did not demand attention or ask for toys. They just watched me with hyper-vigilant eyes, tracking my every movement across the room. I stood at the stainless steel sink washing the dinner plates. The warm, soapy water felt grounding after a day built on deception. I picked up a heavy metal serving spoon to scrub the handle. It slipped through my wet fingers and hit the bottom of the metal sink. The sharp clatter echoed loudly against the tile backsplash. Behind me, I heard a sudden, harsh intake of breath. I turned around. Mason and Harper had dropped their crayons. They were both rigid. Mason's small shoulders were hiked up to his ears, his neck tight with tension. Harper had instinctively raised her small hands to cover the back of her head, pressing her face toward the granite countertop. They were bracing for an impact. I stood frozen with the water running over my hands. It was a reflex born of chaos. It was the physical manifestation of living in a household where sudden noises preceded unpredictable anger. This was Carter's spiritual parenting. Behind the expensive Instagram photos and the raw vegan manifestos, my brother had raised two children who were conditioned to expect a threat the second a spoon hit the sink. A profound, quiet fury rooted itself deep in my chest. I dried my hands on a towel and walked over to the island. I pulled out a stool and sat down, bringing myself to their eye level. I spoke in the softest, most even tone I could manage. "You are safe here," I promised them. "I drop things all the time. No one is ever going to yell at you in this house." Harper slowly lowered her hands. Mason let out a shaky breath and picked up his blue crayon. I watched them return to their drawing. The invoice I was building on my laptop was no longer just a petty retaliation for a ruined weekend. It was an eviction notice for my family's delusion. I was going to build an ironclad legal and financial fortress around these children, and I was going to fund it using the very assets my parents were trying to protect. But hiding the forgery from the school was only a temporary fix. I needed professional daytime childcare to cover the hours the twins were not in class so I could focus on my audit. I had no idea that hiring help would trigger a reaction from my mother that would force me to weaponize the legal system much faster than I anticipated. The fourth quarter corporate audit waited for no one. My dual monitors glowed in the dim light of my home office, displaying endless rows of corporate tax liabilities and offshore asset depreciations. I was managing millions of dollars in multinational accounts, but my mind kept drifting to the quiet, traumatized children sitting in my living room. The Vermont winter was settling in deep, bringing heavy snow and sub-zero temperatures. I could not leave Mason and Harper alone while I navigated grueling 14-hour workdays. I needed professional reinforcement. I approached hiring childcare with the same ruthless efficiency I applied to a forensic audit. I interviewed 5 candidates before selecting Emily. She was a 26-year-old local with a degree in early childhood development, glowing references, and a calm, steady demeanor. I drafted a formal employment contract, offering her $30 an hour for 40 hours a week. It was a massive financial commitment, but I viewed it as a necessary operating expense. I opened my encrypted cloud folder, clicked into the Werner family audit spreadsheet, and logged the anticipated monthly payroll. The total balance of my parents' unauthorized guardianship was growing exponentially, but I was not deterred. I was building a legally binding invoice that would eventually hit them with the force of a freight train. Emily started on Wednesday. Within 48 hours, she confirmed my darkest suspicions about Carter's spiritual parenting. I walked into the kitchen for a coffee break and found Emily quietly organizing the pantry. She turned to me with a deeply concerned expression. She explained that the twins did not know how to play with toys. They lacked basic creative imagination. Worse, they were hoarding non-perishable food. Emily had found granola bars and dried fruit hidden under their pillows and tucked into the pockets of their new winter coats. They were stockpiling calories because they were accustomed to inconsistent meals, while Carter and Lauren prioritized their raw vegan aesthetic over basic childhood nutrition. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. I instructed Emily to buy whatever groceries they wanted and to leave a basket of snacks on the kitchen counter where the twins could see it at all times. I wanted them to know that resources in this house were unlimited. I added a separate line item to the spreadsheet for pediatric psychological counseling. I was going to ensure my brother paid for the therapy his children desperately needed. I thought the childcare arrangement was a perfect solution. I vastly underestimated my mother's obsession with control. On Friday afternoon, my phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. The caller ID displayed Patricia's name. I took a slow, stabilizing breath and answered. The audio connection was slightly delayed, indicating she was calling from an international network. She and my father were likely sitting in their luxury New York apartment, unpacking from their own recent travels, while facilitating Carter's escape. "Catherine," my mother barked. Her voice was sharp and laced with venom. "I just spoke with your neighbor Linda. She told me there is a strange woman walking my grandchildren down the road. Who is in your house?" I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I hired a professional nanny, I replied, keeping my tone entirely neutral. Her name is Emily. She is highly vetted and holds a degree in early childhood development. I work 60 hours a week, Mother. I cannot supervise them during the day. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic gasp, as if I had just confessed to a violent crime. You are abandoning your own flesh and blood to a hired stranger? She hissed. We entrusted them to you so you could bond with them. You are supposed to be stepping up and acting like a mother. You are pawning them off because you are selfish. You abandoned them on a frozen porch without warning, I countered quietly. I am managing the logistics of your reckless decision. The line went silent for a brief second before Patricia played what she believed was her trump card. Her voice dropped into a low, menacing register. This is unacceptable, Catherine. If you do not fire that woman today and take personal responsibility for those children, I will call Child Protective Services. I will tell them you are neglecting minors in your care. They will come to your house and investigate you for child endangerment. Do you really want an open CPS investigation ruining your prestigious accounting career? My knuckles turned white as I gripped the armrests of my chair. My mother was threatening to weaponize a government agency against me to force my compliance. She was willing to traumatize her grandchildren with a home raid just to maintain her authority. I did not feel fear. I felt a profound, icy clarity. I reached forward and clicked the mouse on my computer, opening a hidden recording application. I hit the red button. The software began capturing the call audio in crystal clear, high definition. I needed her to explicitly admit her crimes on the record. I knew exactly how to extract that confession. I needed to feed her ego. I immediately shifted my breathing. I forced my breath to become shallow and ragged, mimicking the onset of a severe panic attack. Please, I stammered, letting my voice tremble with manufactured terror. Please do not call them. I cannot have an investigation on my record. I am up for partner this year. Please, Mother. I did not ask for this. You forced them on me. I do not know what I am doing. Patricia laughed. It was a cruel, triumphant sound echoing through the phone speaker. She thought she had broken me completely. She thought she had stripped away my corporate armor and reduced me to a helpless, frightened child. I left them on your porch because you need a purpose, she gloated, her voice dripping with arrogant satisfaction. You will do exactly as I say. You will fire that nanny, and you will raise Carter's kids until he is ready to come back. You owe this family, Catherine. If you disobey me, I will make sure the state takes those kids and ruins your life. I let the recording run for 3 more seconds, ensuring I captured every single syllable of her extortion. Then I stopped the recording and saved the audio file to my secure, encrypted folder. I dropped the panicked act instantly, my voice flattened into absolute 0-degree ice. Thank you for confirming that on a recorded line, I said. The triumphant silence on the other end of the phone shattered. What did you just say? Patricia demanded, her confidence faltering. I am a forensic accountant, I explained methodically. I document everything. I currently possess a high-definition audio recording of you explicitly admitting to child abandonment and extortion. But that is not even my most valuable piece of evidence. I opened the manila folder sitting on my desk and pulled out the forged school enrollment documents. If you call Child Protective Services, I continued, I will not fight them. I will welcome them inside. I will hand the state investigators a documented paper trail proving you and Father forged my signature on a government residency affidavit. I will provide them with the utility bill you stole from my federal mailbox to facilitate that forgery. I will hand them the security footage of you abandoning inadequately clothed minors on my property. I paused, letting the weight of the federal crime settle heavily over the phone connection. You will not just face a family dispute, Mother. You will face federal charges for mail theft and identity fraud. You and father will be arrested. Carter will be forced to return from Bali to answer for child abandonment. Do you truly want to test my willingness to destroy you?" Patricia was completely silent. I could hear her shallow breathing over the line. The predator had just realized she walked directly into a steel trap. She tried to formulate a response to spin the narrative back in her favor, but she had absolutely no leverage left. "Do not ever threaten me in my own home again," I stated firmly. "The childcare expenses are being logged. You will receive the itemized invoice when I deem it appropriate." I hung up the phone and blocked her secondary number. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled a long, steady breath. I had successfully neutralized the immediate threat, but the victory felt hollow. I was protecting the twins, but the financial reality of the situation was beginning to mount. Between the premium nanny salary, the winter gear, and the upcoming therapy sessions, the out-of-pocket costs were draining my personal checking account at an alarming rate. I opened my banking application to transfer funds from my savings. As the dashboard loaded, a bright red notification banner flashed across the top of my screen. It was an urgent alert from my premium credit monitoring service, indicating a massive shift in my financial profile. I clicked the alert. My eyes scanned the raw data, and my heart completely stopped. The family dysfunction I was dealing with was no longer just about abandoned children and forged school papers. My parents were hiding a secret so financially catastrophic it was about to blow my entire life apart. The red notification banner pulsed on my dual monitors, casting a harsh glare across the darkened office. The digital warning demanded my immediate attention. To comprehend the audacity of the financial betrayal I was about to uncover, you must understand the relentless hemorrhage of capital and energy I had endured over the preceding 30 days. My mother did not surrender after I neutralized her attempt to weaponize Child Protective Services. Patricia merely changed her battlefield. Denied the ability to use the state against me, she launched a venomous social crusade across our extended family network. My cell phone became a constant stream of unsolicited vitriol. Aunts and distant cousins who had not spoken to me in years flooded my inbox with paragraphs of condemnation. They accused me of being a soulless corporate drone. They claimed I was psychologically damaging the twins by abandoning them to a hired stranger while I chased partnership status at my firm. Patricia had spun a masterful narrative, painting herself as a desperate, loving grandmother, and me as an unfeeling monster. I did not defend myself. Explaining reality to people committed to a delusion is an inefficient use of time. I simply opened my contacts and systematically blocked every relative who dared to send a lecture. However, I knew Patricia would not stop at text messages. She had already stalked my nanny on social media. I needed to ensure my perimeter was secure. I asked Emily to sit with me at the kitchen island after the twins went to sleep. I slid a thick white envelope across the granite countertop. Inside was a substantial cash advance equaling 2 full weeks of her premium salary. Emily looked at the currency with wide, uncertain eyes. I explained that my mother was a highly volatile individual who might attempt to contact her, harass her, or manipulate her into quitting. I told Emily the cash was a hazard retainer. Her only obligation was absolute loyalty to me and strict silence toward anyone sharing my last name. Emily nodded, sliding the envelope into her purse. I had effectively purchased an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, securing my daytime childcare. With my work schedule stabilized, I mistakenly believed we had reached a baseline of operational calm. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning. I woke up at 4 o'clock to the sound of quiet, muffled sobbing coming from the guest bedroom. I found Mason curled into a tight ball, clutching the right side of his face. His cheek was swollen and radiating heat. I canceled my morning client meetings and drove him to an emergency pediatric dental clinic. Sitting in the sterile, brightly lit examination room, I watched the dentist review the panoramic x-rays. Dark shadows clouded several of Mason's primary teeth. The dentist explained the decay was severe and deeply rooted, indicating years of neglect. Lauren and Carter prioritized a highly curated raw vegan lifestyle for their followers, but they apparently considered basic oral hygiene an unnatural imposition on their children's free-spirited auras. Mason required immediate extractions and stainless steel crowns to prevent the infection from spreading into his jawbone. The front desk receptionist handed me a treatment plan totaling thousands of dollars. Dental insurance is a luxury Carter and Lauren never bothered to secure. I pulled my debit card from my wallet and handed it over without hesitation. The plastic card slid through the terminal, processing the steep medical expense. Standing in that clinical waiting room, listening to the receipt printer hum, a bitter memory surfaced from the depths of my adolescence. I was 18 years old. I had spent the entire summer working grueling double shifts at a local diner, saving every possible penny to pay for my upcoming college tuition. My bank account held exactly $5,000. It was my ticket to independence. 2 weeks before classes started, Carter wrapped his sports car around a streetlight. He was driving under the influence. David and Patricia sat me down in the living room and demanded I withdraw my entire savings to cover his elite defense attorney. When I cried and refused, my father stood over me, enforcing the golden rule of our household. Family helps family, Catherine. You can take out student loans, but your brother needs a second chance. They drained my account to preserve his future. The generational pattern was undeniable. I was the perpetual safety net. Carter was the eternal investment. I returned to the farmhouse with a groggy, recovering nephew and a newfound sense of lethal clarity. I walked into my office and opened the Werner family audit. It was no longer just a spreadsheet tracking incidental expenses. It was evolving into a structured, legally binding corporate invoice. I itemized the emergency dental surgery. I calculated the hazard retainer paid to Emily. I documented the premium groceries and the replacement winter wardrobes. I applied a compounding daily interest rate to the total balance. I was liquidating my family's delusion one line item at a time. Which brings us back to the present moment. I sat staring at the pulsing red notification banner on my screen. I clicked the alert and opened the raw data report from my credit monitoring bureau. A brand new high-limit revolving credit account had been successfully opened 48 hours prior. The issuing bank was a major national institution. The primary account holder listed on the approval forms was Catherine Werner. The Social Security number matched mine perfectly. My parents had not just dumped their grandchildren on a frozen porch to facilitate a spiritual awakening. They were actively hiding a catastrophic financial secret. They did not have the capital to fund Carter's international escape. To solve their liquidity crisis, they crossed the threshold from toxic parenting into federal financial crimes. They stole my identity. They used my pristine credit score to secure a premium travel card, and they immediately maxed out the available limit to purchase Carter and Lauren's first-class international flights and secure their luxury villa reservations in Southeast Asia. They were funding the Golden Child's tropical paradise by secretly bankrupting the daughter raising his abandoned children. I did not panic. I reached for my cell phone and dialed the toll-free number printed on the back of my primary bank card. I navigated the automated menus until I reached the Specialized Fraud Prevention Department. A representative answered, asking how they could assist me. I kept my voice perfectly level. I stated that my identity had been compromised and a fraudulent account was currently active. I instructed the representative to freeze the card immediately and initiate a federal trace on the charges. I was silently severing the golden umbilical cord. Somewhere across the globe, my brother was about to step up to a cash register and discover his endless vacation was abruptly, permanently canceled. I hung up the phone with the Fraud Prevention Department and watched the digital confirmation appear on my screen. The unauthorized credit account was officially locked. The federal trace was active, Severing my parents' illegal financial lifeline was a necessary tactical maneuver, but it did not stop the localized bleeding inside my own home. 1 month into this forced guardianship, the capital drain was staggering. I was hemorrhaging funds at a rate that required a meticulous strategic response. The transition into sudden single parenthood during the fourth quarter audit season required a brutal restructuring of my daily existence. I woke up at 4 in the morning to review offshore asset depreciations before the twins even opened their eyes. I prepared their breakfasts, answered urgent client emails, and briefed Emily on the daily schedule before driving to my firm. The physical exhaustion was a heavy weight pressing down on my shoulders, but the financial drain was far more alarming. Emily demanded $30 an hour for a 40-hour week. That retainer alone consumed a profound portion of my liquid checking account. But the peripheral expenses were escalating just as rapidly. I reviewed my grocery receipts from the past 4 weeks. Mason and Harper were deeply traumatized by food scarcity. During their first few days in my house, Emily caught them hoarding non-perishable items in their coat pockets and under their mattresses. I countered their anxiety with overwhelming abundance. I ensured the kitchen island was permanently stocked with fresh berries, imported cheeses, roasted nuts, and artisanal breads. I wanted them to understand that hunger was a banished concept within these walls. Whenever I noticed a bowl emptying, I immediately refilled it. The cost of maintaining this endless supply of premium organic food for 2 growing children added hundreds of dollars to my weekly expenditures. Then came the medical bills. The emergency pediatric dental surgery was a fierce blow to my ledger. The waiting room smelled of sterile gloves and artificial cherry fluoride. Harper sat pressed against my side, gripping my sleeve, while we waited for Mason to emerge from the procedure room. When the dentist finally brought him out, my nephew's face was pale and numbed. He looked so fragile. I wrapped him in a heavy blanket and carried him to my car. I pulled the clinic receipt from my file and traced the typed numbers with my pen. Thousands of dollars charged to repair the rotting decay in my nephew's mouth. Mason spent 3 days on a soft food diet, nursing a swollen jaw, while a course of antibiotics fought the deep infection. While I mashed sweet potatoes and held ice packs to his cheek, I checked my brother's social media feed. Carter was posting vibrant, filtered photographs of himself and Lauren sipping expensive matcha lattes on a pristine Indonesian beach. They curated a flawless bohemian aesthetic for their followers, preaching the virtues of a raw vegan lifestyle. In reality, they were starving their children of basic nutrition and ignoring severe oral decay. I logged the clinical expense into my system, striking the keyboard keys with deliberate, heavy force. The sharp sting of that dental bill brought a bitter memory rushing to the surface. It is a memory permanently etched into my financial psychology. I was 18 years old. I spent my entire summer working grueling double shifts at a roadside diner located just off the interstate. I smelled constantly of stale coffee and fryer grease. My feet ached from 10-hour stretches of carrying heavy ceramic plates. I diligently saved $5,000 to fund my escape to college. 2 weeks before my classes started, Carter crashed his sports car into a municipal light pole. He was driving under the influence. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table. I can still feel the exact texture of the pen my father handed me. The plastic barrel was cold against my shaking fingers. He placed my own checkbook in front of me. He told me that family makes sacrifices during difficult times. He explained that Carter needed an elite defense attorney to avoid a harsh sentence and preserve his record. I cried and refused to sign. My father leaned over the table, his voice dropping into a stern, unyielding register. He said Carter needed a clean slate because he was destined for greatness. He told me I had plenty of time to earn the money back. I wrote the check, draining every cent I had earned to keep my brother out of a county jail cell. I watched my father slide the paper across the table and fold it into his wallet without a single word of gratitude. He simply nodded, as if I had paid a mandatory tax for the privilege of sharing their last name. I spent my freshman year of college eating instant noodles to survive. That was the precise moment the generational hierarchy was codified. Carter was the prized investment. I was nothing more than an emergency slush fund. Sitting in my Vermont office, staring at the glowing monitors, the final remnants of familial obligation evaporated into the freezing winter air. Forensic accounting is a discipline built on the removal of emotion. It relies on the binary truth of debits and credits. When you strip away the sentimental labels of mother, father, and brother, what remains is often a hostile entity bleeding your resources. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not guilt-trip you or call you selfish. They simply present the factual reality of a situation. I stopped viewing Patricia, David, and Carter as my relatives. I superimposed a corporate structure over their dysfunction. They were an insolvent, corrupt enterprise built on predatory extraction and fraudulent practices. I specialize in identifying hidden liabilities and liquidating irredeemable assets. I decided in that moment to dismantle their operation with cold, calculated precision. I formalized the Werner family audit. This was no longer a simple expense tracker used for personal budgeting. It was evolving into a legally binding corporate invoice. I categorized the line items with extreme care. The first section held the direct out-of-pocket costs. I listed the premium childcare, the emergency medical bills, the winter wardrobes, and the inflated grocery runs. The second section held the unauthorized debt they attempted to saddle me with via the stolen identity credit card. The third section is where my professional expertise truly materialized. I applied a compounding daily interest rate to the entire balance, citing standard corporate penalties for unapproved borrowing. But I did not stop at standard financial expenses. I created a distinct, unique category for hazard pay. My parents had orchestrated a hostile physical dumping of 2 minors on a freezing porch. They threatened to weaponize government agencies to force my compliance. They committed federal mail theft to forge educational residency documents. I assigned a steep premium to this psychological warfare. I value my professional time at a partner track rate of $500 an hour. I billed them for every single hour I spent managing the school administration, the dental clinic, and the grocery store. Every threat my mother issued added another zero to the ledger. I printed the itemized pages on thick, high-quality watermarked legal paper. I gathered the digital evidence, storing it on an encrypted flash drive. The drive contained the security camera footage of the driveway ambush, the recorded phone call capturing Patricia's extortion, the forged school residency affidavit, and the official bank fraud report. I placed every printed document and the drive into a heavy leather binder. I locked the binder inside my fireproof wall safe. The trap was set. The legal foundation was unshakable. But I knew better than to send a formal demand letter prematurely. I needed them to feel the fierce sting of consequence before I revealed my hand. I needed the pristine illusion of their tropical escape to shatter in front of an audience. I waited patiently for the frozen credit card to detonate their reality. It took less than 72 hours. My laptop chimed with a secure email notification from the bank fraud division. An attempted transaction of $8,000 at a luxury villa resort in Bali had just been swiftly declined. A moment later, my cell phone began to ring, displaying an incoming international call. The golden child was stranded. The sharp, digital chime of my credit monitoring application sliced through the quiet hum of the farmhouse. It was late evening. The Vermont wind rattled the window panes of my home office. I was deeply immersed in a complex amortization schedule for a corporate client. I shifted my gaze to the secondary monitor. A crimson banner spanned the top of the dashboard. The system had detected a hard inquiry on my credit profile. This initial ping was followed immediately by the opening of a premium travel rewards account. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A cold, metallic taste flooded the back of my mouth. I had not applied for any new financial products. I maintain a pristine credit score guarded by strict security protocols. I clicked the alert requiring dual-factor authentication to access the raw data file. The digital ledger populated on my screen. The issuing institution was a prominent national bank. The account holder listed on the approval forms was Catherine Werner. The Social Security number matched mine perfectly. My parents did not just dust off a dormant joint account from my college years. They had actively bypassed my security measures. They inputted my date of birth. They provided my mother's maiden name, which was conveniently Patricia's own surname. They answered security questions regarding the street I grew up on and the model of my first car. They fabricated my annual income to secure the highest possible borrowing tier. The approved limit was $30,000. This crossed a stark legal threshold. This was premeditated felony identity theft. Weaponizing intimate family knowledge to bypass banking security is a profound betrayal. For a fraction of a second, my analytical armor fractured. A sudden sharp ache bloomed in my chest, restricting my breathing. These were the people who raised me. They had sat at my dining table, smiled at me, and secretly plotted to bankrupt my future. The scale of the deception was staggering. They were willing to sacrifice my financial stability, my pristine record, and my professional reputation just to subsidize Carter. But grief is an inefficient emotion. It clouds judgment and delays necessary tactical responses. I forced a deep, steadying breath into my lungs. The sorrow evaporated, replaced instantly by a crystalline zero-degree fury. I superimposed my corporate forensic mindset over the bleeding wound of familial betrayal. I stopped viewing Patricia and David as my parents. They were hostile actors engaged in predatory extraction. I utilized the compromised credentials listed in the report to access the online banking portal. I claimed the fraudulent profile and opened the transaction history. The audacity of the pending charges illuminated the dark room. I studied the timestamps on the purchases. $12,000 had been spent on 2 first-class international flights to Denpasar, Indonesia. Another $5,000 was directed to a luxury beachfront resort in Bali, securing a private villa. There were charges for VIP airport lounge access, imported luggage, and premium travel insurance. The airline tickets were booked 3 weeks before my parents dumped the twins on my porch. The luxury villa deposit was processed 2 days after that. Every single move was meticulously planned. They knew they were stealing my credit long before they ever drove to Vermont. They orchestrated the abandonment of Mason and Harper because they needed a free caretaker while they funded the getaway with my stolen identity. The logistical malice required to execute this plan was breathtaking. They dumped their grandchildren on my freezing porch, forced me to absorb the cost of premium childcare, and rewarded themselves by swiping a card in my name. As I scrolled through the itemized luxury purchases, a crucial forensic question surfaced in my mind. Why did they need my credit? Patricia and David constantly projected an image of upper-middle-class prosperity. They drove leased European vehicles. They maintained a membership at an exclusive country club. They hosted lavish holiday parties, catering to their pretentious social circle. If they wanted to send their golden child on a tropical vacation, they should have simply charged the flights to their own platinum accounts. Stealing a child's identity is an act of profound desperation. You do not risk federal prison if you have liquid assets. The answer was chillingly obvious. Their own credit was decimated. The pristine suburban facade they maintained was nothing more than a fragile theatrical set built on crushing debt. They were hiding a darker financial rot. Over the years, they must have co-signed countless failed business loans for Carter. They likely drained their savings to maintain their lifestyle. I began to hypothesize about their primary residence. If they lacked basic liquidity, they might have leveraged their home equity. They were on the brink of ruin, and I was the only untapped resource left in the family tree. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the toll-free number printed on the fraud alert dashboard. I navigated the automated menus with ruthless precision. A specialized representative answered, asking how they could assist me. I kept my voice perfectly level. I did not stammer or hesitate. I stated that my identity had been compromised and a fraudulent account was currently active under my social security number. The representative asked a series of verification questions. I provided the correct answers, proving my true identity. I instructed them to lock the account permanently. I demanded a formal trace on all pending transactions and requested a sworn fraud affidavit be mailed to my physical address. The representative paused after reviewing the transaction history. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of professional caution. "Given the nature of these charges and the verification data used to open the account, identity theft of this magnitude is often perpetrated by someone known to the victim. If we proceed with the federal trace and issue the fraud affidavit, it will trigger an official investigation. The responsible parties could face severe criminal prosecution." He was giving me an out. He was offering me the standard societal exit ramp designed to protect toxic family members from the consequences of their own actions. "I understand the implications," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "Proceed with the trace. I intend to press full charges against anyone involved in the unauthorized use of my credentials." The representative exhaled a breath of surprise, but resumed his typing. The keystrokes echoed through the earpiece. With every click of the keyboard, I was silently severing the financial umbilical cord sustaining my brother's tropical delusion. The representative confirmed the permanent freeze and provided me with a federal incident reference number. I wrote the sequence of digits in red ink across the top of my legal pad. I hung up the phone and set it on the mahogany desk. I turned my chair toward the window, watching the snow falling quietly over the frozen lake. The trap was armed. The digital guillotine had dropped. I logged the fraudulent charges into the Werner family audit spreadsheet, transferring the exact dollar amounts to the primary invoice. I added the standard corporate penalties for identity theft and unapproved borrowing. I treated the theft as an unauthorized corporate withdrawal, assigning the highest possible compounding interest rate allowable by law. Emily was upstairs reading a bedtime story to Mason and Harper. The house was warm and peaceful. I checked the current time zone in Indonesia. It was prime dinner hour in Bali. Carter and Lauren were likely sitting in an open-air restaurant, surrounded by glowing lanterns, preparing to order an exorbitant meal for their social media followers. They had no idea that their entire financial ecosystem had just been vaporized. I sat in the quiet office waiting for the inevitable collision. It took less than an hour. My laptop chimed with a secure email notification from the bank fraud division. An attempted transaction of $800 at a high-end restaurant in Denpasar had just been declined. A few seconds later, my cell phone began to vibrate against the wood of my desk. The screen lit up, displaying an incoming call with an international country code. The golden child was stranded, and he was about to discover exactly who held the keys to his survival. The vibrating phone on my desk illuminated the dark office, casting a pale glow across the scattered tax documents. I did not answer the international call immediately. I let it ring. I wanted the desperation to marinate. Instead, I picked up my personal tablet and navigated to my brother's public social media profile. I knew exactly what I would find. Carter built his entire persona on projecting an illusion of effortless prosperity. I tapped his glowing profile picture to view the live broadcast he had initiated just 15 minutes prior. The screen filled with a vibrant, high-definition feed from a beachfront restaurant in Denpasar. The scene was curated to perfection. Glowing paper lanterns swayed gently in the tropical breeze. The ocean waves crashed softly against the pristine white sand in the background. Carter sat at a teakwood table, wearing a designer linen shirt unbuttoned to reveal a tanned chest and a crystal pendant. Beside him, Lauren smiled serenely at the camera, holding a coconut water garnished with exotic orchids. Carter was speaking directly to his followers, preaching his usual hollow gospel. He stared into the lens, detailing how manifesting abundance was simply a matter of aligning one's spiritual frequency. He swept his phone around the table, showcasing a sprawling feast. There were plates of imported truffles, rare seafood towers, and bottles of artisan sparkling water. It was a dining experience priced at a premium, designed specifically for tourists eager to burn capital. "Watch this," Carter boasted, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "True wealth is not about hoarding paychecks in a miserable cubicle. It is about trusting the universe to provide. The universe always honors the bold." As he delivered his prepared monologue, a waiter dressed in a crisp white uniform approached the edge of the frame, holding a leather checkbook. Carter did not even look at the man. He casually reached into his pocket, withdrew a sleek metal credit card, and dropped it onto the leather folio. The waiter bowed slightly and walked away toward the point-of-sale terminal inside the restaurant. I sat in my freezing Vermont farmhouse, wrapped in a wool sweater, watching the broadcast with clinical detachment. The dramatic irony of the moment was exquisite. Thousands of strangers were watching my brother parade his fabricated success, while I sat alone in the dark, knowing he had just handed a server a piece of plastic tied directly to a federally flagged identity theft report. Carter continued to speak, responding to comments rolling across the screen. He dispensed vague financial advice, urging his audience to invest in his latest decentralized currency project. He played the role of the enlightened guru flawlessly. 4 minutes passed on the live stream. The tension in my office was thick enough to cut. The waiter returned to the teakwood table. He did not bow this time. He leaned down and whispered something into Carter's ear. The shift in my brother's demeanor was instantaneous. The serene, enlightened aura evaporated. His posture stiffened, his jaw clenched tight. He looked down at the metal card resting on the tray. He snapped his fingers, pointing aggressively at the waiter, and muttered a sharp command, demanding the man try running the chip again. The waiter shook his head, maintaining a polite but firm expression. He gestured toward the restaurant manager, who was now standing near the entrance, watching their table closely. Lauren noticed the shift. Her serene smile faltered. She placed her coconut water down and whispered a question to her husband. Carter ignored her. His face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. The curated illusion was cracking in real time, broadcast to an audience of strangers. He reached forward and abruptly ended the live feed. The screen on my tablet went black. 3 seconds later, my cell phone resumed its frantic vibrating. The screen flashed with Carter's international number. The universe was no longer providing. The universe was demanding payment. I picked up the device and accepted the call. Catherine Carter shouted before I even offered a greeting. His voice was shrill, stripped of its usual smooth cadence. I could hear the chaotic background noise of the Balinese restaurant. "What did you do to the account?" I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, pressing the phone to my ear. I did not raise my voice. I spoke in the calm, measured tone of a forensic auditor, delivering a final assessment. "I am assuming your transaction was declined," I stated. Carter let out a frantic, breathless laugh. "Stop playing games, Catherine. The waiter just humiliated me in front of the entire dining room. The terminal said the card was confiscated. You need to call the bank right now and authorize the purchase. We have a $1,000 bill sitting on this table, and the manager is threatening to call the local police." I opened my encrypted cloud folder and brought the Werner family audit spreadsheet onto my primary monitor. "I cannot authorize the card, Carter," I explained smoothly. "The bank issued a permanent freeze. I reported the account for identity theft earlier this evening. The fraud division is currently executing a federal trace on all pending transactions." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the line. The background noise of the restaurant seemed to amplify, filling the void. I heard Lauren let out a sharp, terrified sob.
What are you talking about?
Carter hissed, his voice dropping into a panicked whisper. It is not identity theft. Mom and Dad set it up for me. They said they used your information as a temporary guarantor because my credit is tied up in business investments. It was a family loan. You are supposed to be helping us. Stealing a social security number to open a revolving credit account is not a family loan. I corrected, parsing the legal reality for him. It is wire fraud. It is felony identity theft. Mom and Dad committed a crime to fund your vacation, and you are currently in possession of the stolen asset. You are an accessory. Carter began to hyperventilate. The reality of his situation was crashing down around him. He was marooned on an island, thousands of miles from home, carrying a useless piece of plastic with zero liquid capital to his name. The golden child was finally experiencing the harsh, unforgiving gravity of the real world. When panic fails to produce results, predators instinctively turn to intimidation. Carter had spent his entire life watching our father bully his way out of consequences. He decided to employ the same tactic. You listen to me, you miserable corporate drone, Carter snarled, all pretense of spirituality gone. You are going to call the bank and drop the fraud report right now. If you do not fix this, I will ruin you. I have thousands of followers. I will flood your accounting firm with negative reviews. I will call your senior partners and tell them you are unstable. I will destroy your career before sunrise. You think you can trap me? I will burn your life to the ground. I listened to his threats without a single spike in my heart rate. His attempts at extortion were pathetic. He was firing blank cartridges at a reinforced steel bunker. You are in no position to issue threats, I countered, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. While you were manifesting wealth on a beach, I was managing the fallout of your negligence. You abandoned Mason and Harper on a freezing porch with nothing but summer clothing. You left them with rotting teeth and profound food insecurity. I highlighted the final row of my spreadsheet. I hired a premium nanny to supervise them while I salvaged my corporate audit, I continued. I paid for emergency pediatric dental surgery because you ignored your son's severe oral decay. I purchased their winter wardrobes. I bought their food. I have billed you for my professional time spent managing the school district after Mom and Dad forged my signature on their residency documents. I paused, letting the weight of the forged documents sink in. Your current outstanding balance is $20,450, I announced. Carter sputtered, unable to form a coherent word. I am not calling the bank, I stated, finalized the interaction. I am not dropping the federal trace. You are financially stranded. You will not receive a single cent from my accounts, and if you attempt to contact my firm, I will forward the audio recording of this extortion attempt directly to the authorities. You owe me an immense debt, Carter. I suggest you figure out how to wash dishes in Bali. I ended the call. I placed the phone face down on the desk. The farmhouse was completely quiet. Upstairs, the twins were sleeping soundly, wrapped in thick, warm blankets, safe from the chaos their father had created. I knew Carter would not accept defeat. He lacked the capacity for accountability. He would immediately dial New York. He would call David and Patricia weeping about his stranded status, begging them to rescue him. My parents would realize their fraudulent credit scheme had collapsed, and they would panic. Lacking any remaining financial avenues, they would resort to brute force. The financial warfare was shifting into a physical confrontation. By freezing the funds I had backed a desperate, toxic family into a corner, I knew they would drive north to Vermont, seeking to reclaim the children they viewed as mere bargaining chips. They wanted to rip Mason and Harper out of my house to stop the mounting childcare invoice. I leaned forward and checked the live feed from my exterior security cameras. The driveway was empty, illuminated only by the pale moonlight reflecting off the snow. But the storm was coming. The parents were going to invade my sanctuary, and I was ready to lock the gates. The storm broke 48 hours later. My parents realized their fraudulent credit scheme had collapsed, and panic set in. Lacking any remaining financial avenues, they resorted to brute force. The financial warfare was shifting into a physical confrontation. By freezing the funds, I had backed a desperate, toxic family into a corner. I knew they would drive north to Vermont, seeking to reclaim the children they viewed as mere bargaining chips. They wanted to rip Mason and Harper out of my house to stop the mounting childcare invoice and regain leverage. I was sitting in my home office reviewing quarterly earnings reports when a motion alert popped up on my secondary monitor. I clicked the notification, opening the live feed from my exterior security cameras. The silver SUV had returned. It plowed up my driveway, tearing through the fresh snow, and skidded to a halt near the porch. Patricia and David burst out of the vehicle, their faces contorted with rage. They marched toward my front door, completely ignoring the icy conditions. I did not move from my chair. I simply leaned forward and adjusted the volume on the camera's audio feed. I wanted every threat, every manipulation, every toxic demand recorded in high definition. Patricia began pounding violently on the reinforced glass of my front door. The sound echoed through the quiet farmhouse. "Open this door, Catherine!" she screamed, her breath pluming in the freezing air. "You open this door right now. We are taking the kids back." I stood up from my desk. Mason and Harper had heard the shouting. They ran into the hallway, their eyes wide with terror. They did not run toward their grandparents. They ran straight to me, pressing themselves tightly behind my legs. Mason buried his face in my skirt, trembling violently. A fierce, protective instinct surged through me. These children were seeking refuge from the very people who were supposed to protect them. I walked slowly down the hallway, keeping the twins shielded behind me. I stopped 3 feet from the heavy oak door. I did not unlock the deadbolt. I did not even reach for the handle. Patricia saw me through the glass, her pounding intensified. "Bring them out here," she demanded, her voice shrill with hysteria. "You are ruining this family. Carter is stranded in Indonesia because you are being a selfish, spiteful little girl. We are taking Mason and Harper back to New York." "Where exactly are you going to put them, Mother?" I asked, my voice projecting clearly through the door, cutting through her hysteria with icy precision. "You do not have the space or the resources to care for them." "I have arranged for Linda to watch them," Patricia countered, referencing her elderly neighbor who could barely manage her own daily affairs. "It is none of your business. You drop those fraud charges right now, Catherine, or I swear to God, I will leave these kids at a police station and let them become wards of the state. I will not let you destroy Carter's life over a misunderstanding." I felt a cold, heavy knot form in my stomach. My mother was threatening to abandon her own grandchildren to the foster care system simply to protect her golden child from facing the consequences of his actions. She was perfectly willing to traumatize Mason and Harper permanently just to maintain her fragile delusion of control. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and withdrew a sealed white envelope. Inside was a formal legal demand letter I had drafted with my attorney Gideon earlier that morning. I slid the envelope through the brass mail slot at the bottom of the door. It dropped onto the frosty porch, right at Patricia's feet. "Pick that up," I instructed, calmly. Patricia stopped pounding. She looked down at the envelope and then back up at me, her expression twisting into a mask of pure venom. "What is this?" she sneered. "That is formal notification," I explained, my voice steady and unwavering. "I have filed for temporary emergency custody of Mason and Harper. The filing cites documented child abandonment, identity fraud, and your explicit recorded threats to surrender them to the state." Patricia gasped, taking a staggering step backward. "You cannot do that. You are not their mother. I am a recognized legal guardian due to the fraudulent school paperwork you submitted. I corrected her, parsing the legal reality with ruthless efficiency. And I currently have a high-definition audio recording of you threatening to abandon them to the foster care system. That footage is being forwarded to my attorney and the local authorities. David stepped forward, his face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. You ungrateful little witch, he roared, pointing a trembling finger at the glass. We raised you! We sacrificed for you! And this is how you repay us? You are trying to steal Carter's children. I am trying to protect Carter's children. I countered, my voice dropping into a dangerous chill. I am protecting them from parents who starve them and grandparents who weaponize them. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us, amplifying the weight of my words. Now I suggest you turn around and walk back to your car, I stated firmly. If you remain on my property for another 30 seconds, I will call the local police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing. I am sure the responding officers will be very interested in the outstanding federal fraud warrants tied to your names. Patricia stared at me through the glass. The realization that she had completely lost control finally settled in her eyes. The predator had been entirely neutralized. She tried to formulate a response to spin the narrative back in her favor, but she had absolutely no leverage left. She was humiliated, outmaneuvered, and legally cornered. She turned around and stormed back to the SUV. David followed closely behind, muttering vile curses under his breath. They climbed into the vehicle and slammed the doors. The engine roared to life and they sped away, their tires kicking up slush and gravel as they retreated from the battlefield. I stood in the hallway, holding Mason and Harper tight against my legs. I watched the taillights disappear down the winding country road. The immediate physical threat was gone, but the legal warfare was just beginning. My parents would not accept defeat. They lacked the capacity for accountability. They would retaliate, and I needed to be ready. I walked back into my office and opened my encrypted cloud folder. I retrieved the video file from the porch security camera and saved it alongside the other evidence. The dossier was complete. My cell phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. It was an incoming call from Gideon, my civil litigation attorney. I accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear. The emergency custody filing has been processed, Gideon announced, his voice brisk and professional. A judge has signed the temporary order. Mason and Harper are legally under your protection. I exhaled a long, steady breath. The relief was palpable, but I knew the fight was far from over. We need to proceed with the primary civil suit, I instructed Gideon. I want to hit them with everything we have. The child care expenses, the medical bills, the hazard pay, everything. Gideon paused the line, completely silent for a moment. Catherine, he said carefully, your parents just retained counsel. They hired a local attorney named Miller. He just sent over a cease and desist letter. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. A cease and desist for what? Miller is accusing you of extortion, Gideon explained. He claims the invoices you are sending are a malicious attempt to blackmail your parents. He is threatening to countersue for emotional distress and harassment. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. My parents had hired a blustering, cheap attorney to try and bully me into submission. They thought they could intimidate a forensic accountant with empty legal threats. They were about to discover exactly how deeply I had mined their financial records. Let them countersue, I replied, my voice perfectly calm. Prepare a formal response for Miller, but do not just reply to the civil threat. I want you to include the forged school residency documents and the fraudulent credit card application. I want you to forward those files directly to a federal postal inspector and the cybercrime division. I was escalating the conflict from a localized family dispute to a federal criminal investigation. I was going to bury them in a paper trail so dense they would never see daylight again. The trap was fully armed, and I was ready to pull the trigger. The morning after my parents' failed ambush, The Vermont air was thick with impending snow. Inside my home office, the atmosphere was equally dense, but it was the silence that felt the most charged. I sat at my desk, a second steaming mug of black coffee in hand, staring at the dual monitors displaying the Werner family audit. I had meticulously detailed every expense, every act of identity theft, and the emotional hazard pay. It was a digital monument to their exploitation. Yet I knew this was just the opening salvo. My parents were not the type to retreat permanently. They operated on a toxic blend of entitlement and denial, and their humiliation on my porch would only fuel their desire for retaliation. I expected them to regroup, to formulate a strategy that would somehow twist the narrative, casting themselves as victims and me as the aggressor. The first countermeasure arrived in the form of a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered by certified mail. I signed for it with the postman at the door, feeling a familiar prickle of anticipation. Returning to my desk, I slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a formal legal document printed on cheap letterhead from a local attorney named Miller. It was a cease and desist order demanding I immediately halt the harassment and extortion of Patricia and David Werner. The letter accused me of fabricating invoices to blackmail them, citing emotional distress and threatening a countersuit for defamation and unlawful detainment of their grandchildren. It was a blustering, desperate maneuver. Miller was clearly a discount attorney, likely found through a quick internet search, someone eager to collect a retainer without verifying the facts of the case. He assumed he was dealing with a simple familial dispute, easily intimidated by legal jargon. He was woefully mistaken. He was dealing with a forensic accountant who had spent the last 30 days building a fortress of documented evidence. I picked up the phone and dialed Gideon, my civil litigation attorney. Gideon was a sharp, seasoned professional who approached legal conflicts with the precision of a surgeon. He did not traffic in empty threats. He dealt in undeniable facts. I received Miller's cease and desist, I said, my voice steady, keeping the emotion entirely detached. I saw it too, Gideon replied, his tone crisp and efficient. Standard intimidation tactics. They are hoping you will panic and drop the financial demands. How do you want to proceed? We do not just reply to the civil threat, I instructed, leaning forward in my chair. We escalate. I want you to draft a formal response to Miller, but we are not stopping there. I opened my encrypted cloud folder and began outlining the countermaneuver. I want you to forward the forged school residency documents and the utility bill they stole from my mailbox to the Federal Postal Inspector. Then I want you to submit the fraudulent credit card application and the subsequent bank fraud report to the Cybercrime Division. I paused, letting the weight of the instructions settle. We are not treating this as a family disagreement anymore, I continued, my voice dropping into a register of cold, calculated intent. We are treating this as a coordinated criminal conspiracy involving identity theft, wire fraud, and mail tampering. Gideon was silent for a brief moment, a testament to the severity of the action. Catherine, he said carefully, once we involve federal agencies, there is no pulling back. This will trigger official investigations that could result in significant criminal charges for your parents. I am fully aware of the consequences, I replied, my resolve unwavering. They made their choices when they stole my identity and abandoned those children. Now they must face the reality of those choices. I sent the digital files to Gideon, instructing him to execute the maneuver immediately. I wanted the pressure to hit my parents from multiple angles simultaneously. I wanted them to realize that the rules of engagement had irrevocably changed. The execution was swift and devastating. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Gideon. It is done, he announced, his voice laced with a subtle, grim satisfaction. The federal reports have been filed, and I just sent the formal response to Miller outlining the evidence we submitted to the authorities. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a profound sense of control return. How did Miller react? I asked.
Gideon let out a brief, dry chuckle. He panicked. Once he realized he was representing clients involved in documented federal crimes, he immediately dropped them. He sent a formal notice of withdrawal, citing irreconcilable differences and potential conflicts of interest. Your parents are currently without legal representation. The initial wave of satisfaction was quickly replaced by a sharp, focused anticipation. My parents were now legally exposed, isolated, and drowning in a forensic paper trail they could not hope to navigate. They had lost their cheap legal shield, and the reality of the federal investigations was likely beginning to dawn on them. But I knew this escalation would not force them to surrender. It would only increase their desperation. They were accustomed to manipulating their way out of consequences, relying on their curated image to deflect accountability. When that image was threatened, they would lash out. The confirmation arrived late that evening. I was sitting by the fire in the living room, Mason and Harper coloring quietly on the rug, when my cell phone vibrated. It was a blocked number, but I knew the caller before I even answered. I accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear. You have lost your mind.
Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. The police were just at our apartment, Catherine. They were asking questions about stolen mail and fraudulent credit applications. What have you done? I reported crimes that were committed against me, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly calm, an icy contrast to her hysteria. I warned you, Mother. I told you I would not be your scapegoat anymore.
You are destroying this family, she screamed, the sound sharp and piercing.
You are trying to put your own parents in prison over a misunderstanding. Carter is still stranded, and now we have investigators knocking on our door. It is not a misunderstanding, I corrected. Parsing the legal reality for her once again, it is identity theft. And if Carter is stranded, it is because he relied on stolen funds to finance his delusion.
I am not paying that ridiculous invoice,
Patricia retorted, her voice rising in pitch. I will never give you a single cent. I did not argue. I did not engage in the emotional tug-of-war she was desperately trying to initiate. I simply hung up the phone and blocked the number. The silence returned to the farmhouse, but it was a heavy, expectant silence. The legal warfare had reached a new intensity, but I knew I needed a final, definitive strike to ensure their complete capitulation. I needed to uncover the core reason behind their desperate actions. I returned to my office and opened my laptop. I had frozen their credit scheme and triggered federal investigations, but I still needed to understand the true depth of their financial rot. Why were they so desperate to fund Carter's escape that they resorted to stealing my identity? I initiated a deep dive into public property records, utilizing my professional access to specialized databases. I began searching for any liens, encumbrances, or unusual financial activity tied to their primary residence in New York. I scrutinized tax assessments, mortgage histories, and public filings. Hours passed, the glow of the monitors casting long shadows in the dark office. And then I found it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, revealing a secret so massive it explained every desperate, erratic move they had made over the past 30 days. The invoice I was building was no longer just a demand for payment. It was the key to collapsing their entire fragile existence. The glowing monitors in my home office cast long, pale shadows across the hardwood floor. The silence of the Vermont winter night pressed against the window panes, thick and unyielding. My parents were now legally isolated. Their discount attorney had formally withdrawn representation after discovering the federal fraud reports, leaving Patricia and David exposed to the full weight of postal inspectors and cybercrime divisions. They were floundering in a deep tactical disadvantage, but as a forensic accountant, I know that a wounded adversary is often the most unpredictable. I needed to ensure they could never retaliate. I needed to dismantle their foundation so thoroughly that they would have no choice but to surrender. To achieve that total victory, I needed to understand the core motivation behind their desperate crimes. Stealing a child's identity to fund a vacation is an act of profound recklessness. It signaled a severe lack of liquid capital. I hypothesized that their pristine suburban lifestyle was a fragile facade, but I needed documented proof. I initiated a comprehensive forensic dive into public property records, focusing my search on their primary residence in New York. My fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, accessing specialized municipal databases and county clerk registries. The digital archives loaded onto my screen, displaying decades of tax assessments and title transfers. My parents' home was an immaculate, four-bedroom colonial property situated in a highly desirable neighborhood. It was the physical manifestation of the success they constantly projected to their social circle. For years, they had maintained a standard, conventional mortgage, making regular payments that aligned with their visible income. I scrolled through the chronological filings, searching for any recent anomalies. The quiet hum of my computer tower was the only sound in the room. Then, a specific document caught my attention. It was a deed of trust, recorded merely 3 weeks before they drove to my farmhouse and abandoned Mason and Harper on the freezing porch. I opened the digitized PDF file and scanned the lending terms. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Patricia and David had executed a secondary mortgage on their colonial home. They had extracted a staggering amount of equity from the property. But the most alarming detail was not the principal amount. It was the lender. They did not secure this loan through a standard, reputable banking institution. The paperwork was filed by a notorious subprime lending firm specializing in high-risk, predatory loans. The interest rate attached to the principal was exorbitant, bordering on usury. No financially literate individual signs a contract with a subprime lender unless every other legitimate avenue of credit has been exhausted. Traditional banks had clearly rejected their applications due to a catastrophic debt-to-income ratio. My parents were drowning. They had leveraged their entire future, their retirement stability, and the roof over their heads to secure a sudden, rapid injection of cash. A forensic auditor always follows the money. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, analyzing the cash flow timeline. My parents stole my social security number to pay for the international flights and the luxury villa rental in Indonesia. If my compromised credit card funded the travel logistics, where did the predatory mortgage cash go? It had to be tied to Carter. He was the only variable capable of generating that level of systemic panic. I shifted my investigative focus away from my parents and directed it toward my brother. Carter operated a decentralized finance startup, promoting various cryptocurrency ventures to his gullible social media followers. I opened a new browser tab and accessed federal court dockets and regulatory agency databases. I typed the legal name of his corporate entity into the search parameters. The search results populated instantly, painting a grim, undeniable picture. Carter was not in Bali for a spiritual awakening. He was hiding from the United States government. Displayed on my screen was a formal civil enforcement action filed by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The federal document outlined severe allegations against my brother's company. Investigators accused him of defrauding retail investors, misappropriating corporate funds, and operating an unregistered securities offering. The regulatory agency had issued multiple subpoenas demanding his immediate appearance for depositions and the surrender of his financial ledgers. The timeline aligned with terrifying precision. The subpoenas were issued in late October. Days later, my parents signed the predatory secondary mortgage. Shortly after that, they stole my identity to book flights to a country that lacks a streamlined extradition treaty for specific white-collar financial crimes. Finally, they dumped Mason and Harper on my doorstep because fleeing fugitives cannot easily travel internationally with 2 young children in tow.
The sheer scale of the enablement was breathtaking. Patricia and David had mortgaged their entire existence to finance the escape of a federal white-collar suspect. They sacrificed their home, their retirement, and their own grandchildren just to keep their golden boy out of a courtroom. They were harboring a fugitive under the guise of a wellness retreat. This revelation shifted the entire dynamic of the battlefield. My parents were not just arrogant manipulators, they were over-leveraged to the breaking point. They were balancing on a razor-thin wire of insolvency. Their monthly obligations to the primary mortgage and the new subprime loan likely consumed every cent of their fixed income. They were one financial breeze away from total catastrophic bankruptcy. I looked at the Werner family audit spreadsheet glowing on my primary monitor. The document I had created to track winter coats and nanny retainers was no longer just an invoice. It was a lethal weapon. I began to update the final totals with a sense of clinical detachment. I calculated the premium salary paid to Emily, ensuring the twins had stable, reliable care while I managed my corporate tax season. I added the exorbitant dental bills required to fix the severe decay caused by Carter's negligent parenting. I factored in the organic groceries, the winter parkas, and the heavy snow boots. I included the legal retainers I had paid to Gideon to draft the emergency custody filings and manage the federal fraud responses. Finally, I adjusted the hazard pay, multiplying my professional hourly rate by the sheer volume of psychological warfare I had endured. The final balance calculated at the bottom of the column. It totaled exactly $42,600. To a wealthy family, that number might represent a mild inconvenience. To Patricia and David, it was a death sentence. I understood the precise mechanics of their predatory loan. Subprime lenders include strict default clauses in their contracts. If a new, significant debt is registered against the property owners, or if a service lien is attached to the deed, it immediately triggers a breach of contract. The lender can demand the entire principal balance be paid in full immediately, forcing the property into foreclosure. If my parents failed to pay my invoice, I would instruct Gideon to file a formal service lien against their colonial home to recover the childcare and fraud expenses. That single legal filing would act as the needle bursting their fragile debt bubble. The subprime lender would swoop in and seize their house. I held the deed to their comfortable suburban life in the palm of my hand. The power dynamic had permanently inverted. I was no longer the invisible daughter expected to silently absorb the collateral damage of their choices. I was a recognized, heavily armed creditor, and I was about to collect. I saved the final version of the invoice and exported it as a crisp, watermarked digital document. The trap was meticulously set. All I needed now was for the targets to walk into the room. Across the globe, the situation in Indonesia was rapidly deteriorating. The frozen credit card had severed their daily survival funds, leaving Carter and Lauren unable to purchase food or maintain their luxury villa. But the crisis was much deeper than a declined restaurant bill. The Securities and Exchange Commission routinely freezes domestic bank accounts tied to active fraud investigations. The cash injection my parents had provided from the secondary mortgage was likely trapped in frozen assets. Carter was truly stranded without access to capital, legal counsel, or diplomatic leverage. The spiritual retreat was over. Facing eviction from their resort and potential scrutiny from local authorities operating on expired tourist visas, my brother and his wife had no alternative remaining. They were forced to beg extended family members for economy tickets back to the United States. They were returning to American soil broke, defeated, and entirely unaware of the legal fortress I had constructed around their children. The final confrontation was imminent, and I was ready to deliver the exact cost of their audacity. The flight from Denpasar to Boston is grueling under the best circumstances. When you are flying economy on borrowed funds while fleeing an international eviction and a domestic federal investigation, the journey must feel like a specialized form of purgatory.
Carter and Lauren landed on a Tuesday. They did not drive to my farmhouse. The temporary emergency custody order mandated that all interactions regarding Mason and Harper occur in a neutral, verified legal setting. They were legally compelled to meet me at Gideon's civil litigation firm in downtown Burlington. Gideon's office was designed to intimidate. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, utilizing heavy mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling legal libraries, and a distinct lack of natural light. The air inside felt pressurized. I arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, projecting the exact corporate authority my family always mocked. I took my seat beside Gideon at the long, polished conference table. Patricia and David arrived first. The physical toll of the past few weeks was starkly visible on their faces. My father looked 10 years older, his usual robust posture replaced by a defeated slump. My mother clutched her designer handbag as if it were a flotation device, her eyes darting nervously around the room. They sat across from us, refusing to make eye contact. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak door swung open. Carter and Lauren walked in. The contrast between their curated social media aesthetic and their current reality was staggering. The golden child was entirely stripped of his spiritual glow. His expensive linen shirt was wrinkled and stained. His tan looked sallow under the harsh fluorescent lights of the reception area. Lauren looked deeply exhausted, her raw vegan vitality replaced by dark circles and a rigid, terrified posture. They had been evicted from their luxury villa, their credit cards declined at every terminal, and their tropical escape reduced to a humiliating retreat. Yet despite his profound failure, Carter attempted to command the room. He strutted toward the table, pulling out a chair with exaggerated force. He flashed a practiced, arrogant smile, attempting to project the illusion that he was still in control. "All right, Catherine," he announced, clapping his hands together. "We played your little game. You got your revenge for the babysitting gig. Now go get Mason and Harper. We have a long drive back to New York, and I am done indulging this temper tantrum." I did not flinch. I kept my posture perfectly still, letting the silence stretch across the table. I looked at the man who had coasted through life on the sacrifices of others. He truly believed he could simply walk back into the country, snap his fingers, and erase the damage he had caused. He believed the rules of consequence did not apply to him. "The children are safely secured with their professional nanny," I stated, my voice smooth and devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "They will remain in my legal custody until the temporary emergency order is formally resolved by a family court judge, and that resolution will not occur today." Carter's arrogant smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? I am their father. You cannot just keep them." Gideon leaned forward, folding his hands over a pristine legal pad. Under normal circumstances, Mr. Werner, a parent, retains primary rights. However, given the documented evidence of abandonment, the squalid state of their dental health, and your current status as a person of interest in an active Securities and Exchange Commission investigation, the court deemed your custody an immediate threat to the minor's well-being. Carter turned pale. The mention of the federal regulatory agency shattered his fragile composure. He glanced frantically at Patricia and David, seeking the unconditional rescue he had relied on his entire life. But my parents remained silent, staring at the polished wood of the table. "This brings us to the financial resolution," I interjected, reclaiming command of the room. I reached into my leather briefcase and retrieved the thick-bound dossier containing the Werner family audit. I placed my hand on top of the cover. I slid the heavy binder across the mahogany desk. It hit the space directly in front of my mother with a dull, definitive thud. This was the exact moment the timeline synchronized, bringing us back to the suffocating silence I described at the very beginning of this account. I watched Patricia process the cover page. The itemized invoice rested under a clear plastic sleeve printed on crisp, watermarked paper. The final total was highlighted in bold black ink: $42,600. Patricia physically collapsed into the leather guest chair. Her manicured fingers trembled as they hovered over the hazard pay line item and the compounded daily interest. She searched the document for a punchline that did not exist. Carter leaned over his mother's shoulder to read the figures. A sudden harsh bark of laughter erupted from his chest. He looked at me, shaking his head in disbelief. His arrogance surged back, fueled by the sheer absurdity of the demand. "You are clinically insane, Catherine," he scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. 42 grand? Are you serious? You think I'm going to pay you corporate rates to watch my own kids? Even if I wanted to, I could not give you a dime. The feds froze my domestic accounts, and my crypto wallets are locked up in litigation. I am technically bankrupt. You can try to sue me all you want, but you cannot squeeze blood from a stone." He leaned back in his chair, looking incredibly smug. He thought he had outsmarted me. He believed his own financial ruin was his ultimate shield, assuming I had wasted a month building an invoice against an insolvent debtor. I matched his smugness with glacial ice. I reached up and adjusted my glasses, studying his face with deep pity. "You misunderstand the fundamental structure of this ledger, Carter," I explained, my voice echoing softly in the quiet office. "I am a forensic accountant. I never pursue a debtor who lacks liquid assets. I know you are broke. I know you are facing federal indictments. I am not going after you." Carter's smug expression dissolved into profound confusion. He frowned, glancing between me and Gideon. "Then who are you billing?" he demanded. I shifted my gaze across the table, locking eyes with my mother. "I am billing the co-defendants," I stated, cleanly. Patricia let out a sharp, strangled gasp. David shot up from his chair, his face twisting in sudden outrage. "What the hell are you talking about?" my father roared, his voice echoing off the legal volumes lining the walls. "We did not abandon those kids. We did not accrue those charges. You cannot hold us liable for Carter's mess." Gideon raised a single finger, silencing the outburst. "On the contrary, Mr. Werner, you are entirely liable. The evidence submitted to the postal inspector proves you and your wife explicitly forged Catherine's signature on government residency documents. Furthermore, the Cybercrime Division possesses the digital footprints proving you bypassed banking security to open a fraudulent credit line using her Social Security number. You utilized that stolen credit to fund your son's international flight." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, closing the distance between myself and my parents. "You initiated the fraud, Mother. You signed the documents. You committed the felony identity theft. By legally assigning those children to my household and financing the escape, you assumed joint and several liability for every single expense incurred during my forced guardianship." Patricia was hyperventilating now. Her chest heaved, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "We cannot pay that," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the realization. "You know we cannot pay that, Catherine. We do not have $40,000 just sitting in a checking account." "I know exactly what you have," I countered, delivering the fatal blow with surgical precision. "I know you were rejected by traditional lenders. I know you visited a predatory subprime firm in late October. I know you executed a high-interest secondary mortgage on your colonial home to generate the cash to hide your fugitive son." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully curated empire turning to dust. David sank slowly back into his chair, all the fight draining from his posture. He looked at me as if he were staring at a stranger. He finally realized I had mapped every hidden corner of their financial rot. "Subprime lenders are notoriously unforgiving entities," I continued, dictating the terms of their destruction. "They include strict default clauses in their contracts. Yesterday afternoon, Gideon filed a formal legal service lien against your primary residence for the unpaid balance of $42,600. Patricia buried her face in her hands, letting out a low, guttural sob. The illusion was shattered. You have exactly 30 days to produce a certified cashier's check for the full amount I announced. My tone offering zero negotiation. If the balance remains unpaid on day 31, the service lien will trigger a breach of contract with your subprime lender. They will call the entire principal balance due immediately. I will force the sale of your home to satisfy my debt, and you will be evicted. The room descended into a chaotic, fractured panic. David turned to Carter, his face purple with desperation, pleading with the golden child to find the money to call his investors, to do anything to save their house. But Carter just sat there, staring blankly at the wall, offering nothing. The toxic hierarchy was collapsing inward. The parents, who had sacrificed everything to protect their son, were suddenly realizing that their investment offered zero returns. The golden boy was abandoning them to the wolves. The ultimate betrayal was unfolding right in front of me, and I watched it happen with cold, calculated satisfaction. The battle for the money was won, but the war over the children was about to reach its final chilling conclusion. David stood up so fast, his heavy leather chair skidded backward, scraping harshly against the polished hardwood floor. His face transformed into a mask of pure, raw fury. The veins in his neck bulged against the stiff collar of his dress shirt. "You ungrateful, treacherous little snake!" he roared, raising a clenched fist and taking a heavy step toward my side of the long conference table. "I will tear that invoice to shreds, and then I will teach you some respect." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact or lean away from his advance. Gideon simply reached forward and tapped a silver pen against his pristine legal pad. The sharp metallic click echoed in the quiet room, halting my father's momentum. "I strongly advise against any physical posturing," Mr. Werner Gideon stated. His voice was smooth, but laced with a lethal professional warning. "You are currently standing in a private legal firm. There is a discreet, high-definition camera mounted in the corner of this ceiling. It records audio and video 24 hours a day. If you take one more step toward my client, I will press the silent alarm located under this desk. You will be arrested for assault before you can even reach the lobby elevator." David froze in his tracks. He glanced up, tracking Gideon's gaze, to the small black dome blinking in the corner of the room. The fight drained out of him instantly, replaced by the crushing gravity of his legal exposure. He slowly backed away and sank heavily into his chair, burying his face in his calloused hands. The room descended into a heavy, suffocating despair. Patricia had stopped gasping and started weeping. Her tears ruined her carefully applied makeup, leaving dark streaked trails down her pale cheeks. She realized the trap was firmly locked and the key was resting securely in my pocket. Seeking a lifeline, she turned her frantic gaze away from me and focused on the man she had sacrificed her entire existence to protect. "Carter," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the immense strain. "Carter, you have to help us. You have to fix this right now. We took out that predatory loan for you. We put our entire lives on the line so you could flee the country and avoid those federal subpoenas. You told us your offshore accounts would clear in a few days. You promised us we could pay the lender back before the first installment ever hit our bank account." David lifted his head, his eyes red and brimming with desperate tears. He reached across the table and grabbed his son's forearm. "Call your investors, Carter. Call those wealthy business partners you are always bragging about on the internet. Sell your luxury cars, liquidate your watches, do whatever it takes to get us $42,000 today. We are going to lose the house. We are going to be homeless." The spotlight shifted entirely to the golden child.
The parents who had enabled every failure, funded every delusion, and shielded him from every consequence were finally presenting him with a bill. They expected the son they worshipped to swoop in and rescue them from the disaster he orchestrated. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, and watched the toxic ecosystem devour itself in real time. Carter did not meet his father's pleading eyes. He stared down at his own hands, picking nervously at a frayed cuticle on his thumb. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his posture shrinking. The charismatic spiritual guru was gone, replaced by a cornered, frightened boy who had finally run out of other people's money. "I cannot sell the cars," he muttered, his voice barely above an embarrassed whisper. "I leased them. They belong to the dealership. The watches are cheap replicas." Lauren, who had been sitting frozen beside him, let out a sharp, wounded noise. She stared at her husband with wide, horrified eyes. The curated illusion she had married was disintegrating right in front of her. She realized she was legally tethered to a man who possessed zero actual wealth. Patricia reached out and gripped Carter's shirt sleeve. "What about your business accounts?" she begged, leaning closer to him. "You said your decentralized finance company was valued at millions of dollars. You showed us the digital ledgers." The regulatory agencies froze everything, Mom, Carter snapped, a sudden defensive edge creeping into his tone. "My business partners locked me out of the corporate servers the second the subpoenas dropped. I do not have access to a single liquid asset. I am a ghost on paper. I cannot even afford to buy a cup of coffee right now, let alone write a check for 40 grand. He pulled his arm out of his father's desperate grasp. "It is not my fault the crypto market crashed," he continued, shifting the blame with practiced ease. "It is not my fault the government decided to make an example out of my startup. I told you it was a temporary setback. You are the ones who decided to sign that stupid subprime loan contract. I never put a gun to your head. You volunteered to take the risk." He offered a small, dismissive shrug. The gesture was tiny, but it carried the destructive force of a localized earthquake. David stared at his son, his mouth slightly open. The patriarch who had ruled our family through intimidation and financial control was experiencing a profound paradigm shift. He was looking at the hollow void of the person he had prioritized over everything else. The golden boy was abandoning them to the wolves the second their utility expired. Carter felt zero loyalty to the enablers who had ruined themselves for his comfort. He was perfectly willing to let them face foreclosure while he sat back and offered empty excuses. The parasite had successfully drained the host and was now looking for an exit strategy. Patricia turned her tear-streaked face back toward me. Her desperation curdled into a pathetic, pleading whine. "Catherine, please," she sobbed, clasping her hands together in a gesture of prayer. "You cannot do this to us. We are your parents. We raised you. We provided a roof over your head. You cannot force us into foreclosure over an invoice. Where will we go? How will we survive at our age? We will lose everything. We spent our entire lives building." I looked at the woman who had tormented me for decades. I felt no pity. I felt no residual familial obligation. I only felt the cold, precise logic of a balanced ledger. "You lost everything the moment you decided my identity was yours to steal," I answered, my voice dropping to a low, steady chill. "You felt no remorse when you left two shivering children on a frozen porch, wearing paper-thin jackets. You felt no guilt when you stole my social security number to buy first-class tickets to a tropical island. You were perfectly content to let me drown in financial ruin and face corporate discipline as long as it kept your prized son afloat." I uncrossed my arms and placed my hands flat on the mahogany table. "You made a calculated wager, Mother. You bet your house, your retirement, and your freedom on Carter. You are simply experiencing the harsh reality of a terrible investment. I refuse to negotiate a single cent of this debt.
You owe me $42,600 for the premium childcare, the medical expenses, the fraud mitigation, and the sheer audacity of your crimes.
I stood up, smoothing the minor wrinkles from my charcoal suit jacket. You have exactly 30 days, I announced, delivering the final ultimatum. The clock started the moment Gideon filed the service lien against your property deed. I require a certified cashier's check for the full balance. If those funds are not resting securely in this law firm's escrow account by 5 in the afternoon on the 30th day, the foreclosure paperwork is automatically filed with the county clerk. I will force the sale of your home, and I will recoup my losses from the liquidated equity before you see a single dime. I picked up my leather briefcase, preparing to walk out of the room and leave them to their despair. The financial reckoning was established, and there was no escape route left on their map. But as I turned toward the heavy oak door, Carter finally looked up from the table. He was staring at me, but his eyes were not focused on the itemized invoice or his weeping parents. He was calculating his own survival. He was a man with no money, no home to return to, and 2 young children he could not afford to feed. A dark, disturbing realization settled over his features. The battle for the money was concluded, but the war over Mason and Harper was about to reach its final, chilling resolution. I grasped the brass handle of the heavy oak door, fully prepared to leave them drowning in the consequences of their own predatory choices. My hand turned the cold metal, but a voice stopped my exit. Wait, it was Carter. The single syllable hung in the stale air of the conference room. I released the handle and slowly turned around. My brother was staring at the polished wood table, avoiding eye contact with everyone present. His shoulders were slumped, curving inward like a collapsing structure. Lauren sat beside him, wiping tears from her cheeks, carefully preserving her expensive foundation. They were 2 hollow vessels, utterly devoid of substance, facing a reality they could not manifest away. "You cannot just walk out," Catherine Carter mumbled, finally lifting his gaze to meet mine. "I do not have a house. I do not have a bank account. I cannot even rent a motel room tonight. Where are we supposed to go?" "That is a logistical puzzle you will have to solve on your own," I replied, my tone offering zero sympathy. "You have 30 days to produce the funds for your parents' debt. After that, I no longer care where you reside." Carter swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously against his throat. "What about Mason and Harper?" he asked. The mention of my niece and nephew shifted the temperature in the room. David and Patricia, who were still reeling from the foreclosure threat, suddenly looked up. They stared at their son, expecting him to fight for his children, to demand his parental rights, to show a shred of fundamental human decency. "They remain in my legal custody under the temporary emergency order," I stated clearly. "Until a family court judge reviews the evidence of your abandonment, you are barred from interacting with them." Carter let out a long, heavy sigh. It was not a sigh of a desperate father fighting for his family. It was the sound of a man relinquishing a heavy, inconvenient burden. "I cannot afford them, Catherine," he admitted, the words spilling out in a rush of cowardly relief. The entire room froze. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her trembling hand. Lauren nodded silently beside him, confirming the sickening reality. "We do not have the capital to feed them," Lauren added, her voice a fragile whisper. "The organic lifestyle, the matching linen outfits, the spiritual retreats. We only did those things because it generated engagement for our online brand. Sponsors paid for the raw vegan aesthetic. Without the corporate partnerships and the crypto investors, we cannot afford to sustain the image. They are too expensive." I stared at my sister-in-law, feeling a profound wave of nausea wash over me. They did not view Mason and Harper as human beings. They viewed those innocent children as marketing props. The moment the sponsorship deals evaporated, the kids became a financial liability. They starved them and neglected their dental hygiene because those elements occurred off-camera, where the internet could not observe the decay. So keep them, Carter proposed, offering a casual shrug that chilled me to the bone. You have a huge farmhouse. You make a partner-track salary. You clearly bonded with them over the last month. Just keep them in Vermont. It is better for everyone. The sheer, unadulterated apathy radiating from my brother was staggering. He was volunteering to discard his own offspring with the same casual indifference one might use to return a defective appliance. He expected me to accept this arrangement, as a favor to him allowing him to walk away scot-free, while I assumed the lifelong financial and emotional responsibility of raising his children? I looked at David and Patricia. The enablers were sitting in stunned silence, watching their golden investment reveal his true vacant nature. The illusion of the perfect son was permanently shattered, leaving them to choke on the ashes. I walked slowly back toward the conference table, taking my seat beside my attorney. I had anticipated this exact scenario. A forensic accountant never walks into a negotiation without preparing for every possible variable. I am willing to provide a permanent home for Mason and Harper, I announced, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. They are thriving in Vermont. They finally have a stable routine, access to proper medical care, and a household devoid of chaotic narcissism. I will ensure they are raised with the security they deserve. Carter smiled, a look of immense relief flooding his features. Perfect, he chimed, sitting up slightly taller. That solves everything. We will come visit them during the holidays, once we get our startup off the ground again. I raised my hand, stopping his delusion instantly. You misunderstand the nature of this transaction, I countered, my gaze locking onto his. I will not operate as your free, long-term babysitter while you retain the legal right to disrupt their lives. I know exactly how predators operate, Carter. The second you manage to secure a new funding source or secure a new social media partnership, you will demand them back to use as props for your redemption narrative. You will use them as leverage to extort me. I refuse to expose those children to that lingering threat. I turned to Gideon, offering a brief nod. My attorney reached into his leather briefcase and extracted a thick stack of legal documents. He placed the crisp white pages in the center of the mahogany table, sliding a black ink pen next to them. These are voluntary surrender of parental rights forms, Gideon explained, projecting a stern judicial authority. By signing these documents, you are irrevocably terminating all legal claims to Mason and Harper Werner. You will forfeit all custody, visitation, and decision-making authority. My client will initiate a formal kinship adoption process, granting her sole, permanent legal guardianship. Carter stared at the paperwork, his mouth slightly open. Lauren picked up the pen, her hands shaking violently. If you sign these papers, you are legally severing yourselves from their existence, I continued, dictating the final boundary. You will never extort them. You will never claim them. You will step out of their lives permanently. Patricia let out a guttural wail, reaching across the table to grab Carter's arm. You cannot do this, she pleaded, her voice ragged with despair. They are your children, Carter. They are our grandchildren. You cannot just give them away to her. She is stealing our family. Carter looked at his mother, his expression hardening into cold resentment. How am I supposed to feed them, Mom? He snapped, gesturing wildly to the empty room. You guys just lost your house because you took out a predatory mortgage. My bank accounts are frozen by federal regulators. I have nothing left. If Catherine wants to take on the financial burden, then let her take it. It is the only logical solution. He pulled his arm away from Patricia's grasp and reached for the pen. I watched in silent disgust as the golden child signed away his own flesh and blood. He did not shed a single tear. He did not hesitate. He scribbled his signature across the designated lines, pressing firmly into the paper. He handed the pen to Lauren, who quickly mirrored his actions, desperate to escape the crushing weight of maternal responsibility she had never truly wanted. The scratching of the pen on paper echoed through the quiet office. It was the sound of a generational curse being broken. David sat rigidly in his chair, staring blankly at the wall. The patriarch who had demanded my savings to bail out his son was now watching that same son abandon the next generation without a second thought. The entire foundational mythology of their family was incinerated. Gideon collected the signed forms, reviewing the signatures with meticulous care. He stamped the pages with his official notary seal, binding the surrender into permanent legal reality. The transaction was complete. The children were safe. I stood up, gathering my briefcase. A profound sense of peace settled deep into my chest. Miles away in the snowy hills of Vermont, Mason and Harper were playing in my living room, supervised by a trusted professional. They were no longer pawns in a toxic family dynamic. They were legally anchored to a secure, stable future. "You have secured your freedom, Carter," I stated, looking down at the broken man sitting across from me. "You are no longer tethered to the responsibilities of fatherhood. I suggest you use your newfound independence to find a decent bankruptcy attorney." I turned my attention to David and Patricia, who were sitting in stunned, devastated silence, mourning the collapse of their entire, curated existence. "The surrender of custody resolves Carter's obligations," I informed my parents, ensuring they understood the financial boundaries remained rigid. However, the invoice regarding the premium childcare, the medical bills, the stolen identity, and the hazard pay remains entirely active. The service lien is still attached to your primary residence. I walked toward the office door, ready to leave them to their ruin. "You have 29 days left to produce a certified cashier's check for $42,600, I reminded them, turning the brass handle. "I suggest you start liquidating whatever assets you have left." 28 days passed with excruciating precision. I did not contact my parents. I did not inquire about their financial maneuvering or respond to the frantic voicemails they left on Gideon's office answering machine. I simply allowed the heavy ticking clock of the service lien to consume their waking hours. A forensic auditor understands that time is often the most effective instrument of psychological pressure. When an insolvent debtor faces a rigid, unyielding deadline, they cycle through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally, a crushing, desperate acceptance. My father had spent the last 2 decades curating a collection of vintage automobiles. They were pristine machines housed in a climate-controlled garage. He spent his weekends polishing the chrome and bragging about their appreciating value at his exclusive country club. Those vehicles were the ultimate physical manifestation of his ego. They represented a legacy of wealth he pretended to possess and a status he desperately craved. But vintage cars are highly illiquid assets. When you are forced to liquidate a specialized collection within 30 days, you do not dictate the market price. The market dictates your desperation. Through local municipal filings, I tracked the emergency transfer of titles. On day 27, David sold his prized assets to a private commercial buyer. Because he required immediate cash to prevent the subprime lender from foreclosing on his home, he was forced to accept a fraction of their actual appraised value. He incinerated years of equity and pride just to satisfy the massive debt he accrued by enabling his fugitive son. The patriarch was financially and spiritually broken. On the morning of day 29, Gideon called my cell phone. My parents had requested an emergency meeting at his downtown Burlington law firm. They had successfully secured the funds. I arrived at the office wearing a navy blue tailored suit, projecting absolute finality. Gideon sat beside me at the familiar mahogany table, arranging his legal pads. The heavy oak door swung open. Patricia and David walked inside. The transformation was profound and complete. The arrogance that defined their entire existence had been entirely eradicated. My father looked hollowed out,
staring at the floor with defeated, exhausted eyes. He had sacrificed his ultimate prized possessions, and he had absolutely nothing left to show for it. Carter was gone. The grandchildren were legally severed from their lineage. They were left with a looming predatory mortgage and a shattered social reputation.
Patricia approached the table. Her face was a mask of bitter, twisted hatred. Her eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot from weeks of unshed tears and mounting panic. She opened her designer handbag and retrieved a rectangular piece of paper. It was a certified cashier's check drawn from a local bank branch. She did not hand it to me gently. She slammed the slip of paper onto the polished wood and pushed it across the table. Her manicured fingernails scratched harshly against the mahogany surface. "There is your blood money," Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with concentrated venom. "You destroyed us. You took our home, security, you stole our grandchildren, and you forced your father to sell his only joy. I hope you choke on every single penny. You are no longer my daughter. You are dead to this family." I did not react to her emotional outburst. I looked down at the cashier's check. The bank logo sat in the top left corner. The amount was printed in crisp, bold black ink. $42,600. The payee line bore my full legal name, Catherine Werner. It was a flawless financial instrument, guaranteeing the immediate transfer of funds. It was the exact victory I had orchestrated. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a black ink pen. I did not pick up the check. I slid the piece of paper back across the table toward my weeping mother. "I am not accepting this draft," I stated, my voice perfectly calm and level. Patricia stared at the rejected check and then up at me in absolute shock. David finally lifted his heavy head, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Gideon sat silently beside me, completely aware of the strategic maneuver I was about to execute. "What is this trick?" Patricia demanded, her breathing turning shallow and frantic. "The amount is exact. It clears the service lien. Take the money and release our deed right now." "You misunderstood my primary objective," I explained, leaning forward slightly to command the space. "I am a forensic accountant. I track missing capital and I rectify unbalanced ledgers. You assumed I generated this invoice out of personal greed. You assumed I wanted to line my own pockets to compensate for the inconvenience of raising Carter's children. But my financial stability was never the variable in jeopardy. I do not need your liquidated equity to survive." I reached back into my leather briefcase and produced a thick, bound legal document, placing it carefully on the table. "This is a formalized, irrevocable trust document," I announced. "Gideon finalized the paperwork yesterday morning. I established a secure, high-yield educational fund explicitly designed to cover the future college tuition and living expenses for Mason and Harper. It is a legally protected account that cannot be accessed or drained by anyone, including me, until they turn 18 years old." I pointed the black pen at the cashier's check resting in front of Patricia. "I require you to void that specific draft immediately," I instructed, dictating the final unbreakable boundary. "You will contact your banking representative and you will rewrite the check. The new payee line must be made out directly to the Mason and Harper College Trust." The silence in the room was absolute. Patricia and David stared at me as the magnitude of my demand finally washed over them. I was not keeping a single cent of their money. I had forced them to liquidate their prized possessions, drain their savings, and humiliate themselves, simply to fund the future of the innocent children they had discarded on a freezing porch. They had bankrupted themselves to provide a secure foundation for the grandchildren they considered a burden. "You are going to write that check," I continued, my tone dropping into a chilling register of absolute authority. "You are going to deposit your blood money directly into their future. You abandoned them with nothing but summer clothes and rotting teeth. Now you are going to pay for their education." Patricia began to weep openly. a guttural sound of complete and utter defeat. She picked up her pen, her hand shaking so violently she could barely grip the plastic barrel. She wrote the word void across the face of the check in large, jagged letters. The physical act of destroying the draft and accepting my terms was the final nail in the coffin of their arrogance. They were beaten entirely and permanently. As she finished voiding the document, I stood up from my chair and buttoned my suit jacket. I looked down at the woman who had tormented me, manipulated me, and attempted to destroy my career. I felt a profound, echoing peace settle deep into my bones. The financial warfare was over. "I did not charge you for my time, Mother," I said, my voice ringing with cold, undeniable clarity. "I charged you for your audacity." I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy oak door. I left them sitting in the dimly lit conference room, mourning the total collapse of their toxic empire. The children were safe, the future was funded, and the ledger was finally balanced. Exactly 365 days have passed since the heavy oak doors of Gideon's civil litigation firm closed, sealing the fate of the people who used to be my family. I am sitting at the exact same mahogany desk in my home office, looking out over the frozen Vermont lake. The physical landscape remains identical to that fateful morning, but the internal atmosphere of this farmhouse has been fundamentally transformed. The oppressive, silent anxiety of anticipated conflict has been permanently replaced by the vibrant, chaotic noise of genuine childhood joy. If you are listening to this account, you likely understand the suffocating gravity of toxic familial obligation. You have probably been told by society that shared genetics require infinite patience and endless financial sacrifice. You are conditioned to believe that setting a firm boundary is an act of profound betrayal. I meticulously documented this entire ordeal to prove that those narratives are manipulative fictions designed to keep capable individuals tethered to parasitic dynamics. Patricia and David did not survive the financial shockwave they created. Paying the massive invoice wiped out the final remnants of their liquid capital. Without my father's vintage car collection to leverage, and with their credit scores entirely decimated by their fraudulent maneuvering, they could no longer sustain the exorbitant monthly payments on their predatory subprime mortgage. The lender initiated rapid foreclosure proceedings late in the spring. My parents were unceremoniously evicted from their pristine colonial estate. They currently reside in a cramped two-bedroom condominium located in a highly undesirable, heavily industrialized municipality. Their carefully curated social reputation evaporated the exact moment their extended country club circle learned about the federal identity theft investigation and the documented child abandonment. They are now complete social pariahs. They live on a strictly rationed fixed income, agonizing over every minor grocery bill and utility statement. My mother, who once demanded I sacrifice my career to serve her convenience, now spends her days clipping coupons and calculating heating costs. They are finally experiencing the precise financial terror they so willingly inflicted upon me. The golden child faced a reckoning that no amount of spiritual manifestation could prevent. The federal regulatory agencies did not accept his bohemian excuses or his esoteric philosophies. The investigators ruthlessly unraveled his decentralized finance startup, exposing it to the public as a fraudulent, hollow shell company. While he managed to avoid a lengthy prison sentence by fully cooperating with the authorities, turning over all his digital ledgers and naming his co-conspirators, the resulting civil penalties and federal restitution orders completely bankrupted him. Because he accrued massive legal fines and owed substantial arrears to the government, a federal judge permanently revoked his passport. Carter can never flee to a tropical paradise again. He is legally tethered to American soil, heavily monitored by federal auditors. The man who wore imported linen shirts and bragged about luxury beachfront dining to thousands of internet followers is now a standard minimum wage employee. He works 40 hours a week at a massive corporate retail chain stocking shelves and managing inventory.
He wears a stiff, brightly colored polyester uniform and reports to a shift manager who is 10 years his junior. A significant portion of his meager paycheck is automatically garnished by the federal government before he ever sees a direct deposit. Furthermore, a permanent court order bars him from coming within 500 feet of my property or contacting me through any medium whatsoever.
The illusion of his superiority was entirely dismantled, leaving only the crushing weight of ordinary accountability. The most profound transformation, however, occurred within the protective walls of this restored farmhouse. Mason and Harper are completely unrecognizable from the terrified, shivering children my mother dumped on my porch last November. They no longer flinch when a metal spoon drops in the kitchen sink. They do not hoard granola bars in their pockets or hide under their heavy blankets when they hear a sudden loud noise. Mason's jaw is completely healed, sporting a bright, confident smile full of healthy teeth. Harper has discovered a fierce passion for painting, leaving incredibly colorful, sprawling landscapes taped proudly to my stainless steel refrigerator. They are thriving in the local progressive elementary school, surrounded by educators who nurture their actual potential, rather than treating them as convenient aesthetic props for social media engagement. They know with absolute certainty that the kitchen pantry is always full and that they are unconditionally safe. The $42,600 I extracted from my parents currently sits in a secure, high-yield educational trust. The principal amount is compounding daily, ensuring that when the twins turn 18, they will have a flawless financial foundation to build their own independent futures. My parents inadvertently financed the exact stability they tried to destroy. I look at a framed photograph resting on the corner of my mahogany desk. It captures Mason and Harper bundled in their heavy, unbranded down parkas, laughing wildly as they build a massive snowman in the front yard. Their cheeks are flushed with the cold, their eyes bright with unburdened joy. They are vibrant, protected, and deeply loved. Forensic accounting taught me a fundamental, universal truth. Every ledger must eventually balance. You cannot continually withdraw resources from an account without depositing equivalent value. For decades, my family treated my existence as a bottomless line of credit. They assumed my loyalty was permanently guaranteed, regardless of the escalating cost to my own well-being. They believed they could extract my savings, my time, and my identity without ever facing a penalty. They were catastrophically incorrect. Family is an active, continuous choice. It is a verb demonstrated through daily actions of mutual respect and protection. It is never merely an inherited biological obligation. Setting yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm is not an act of nobility or filial piety. It is an act of profound self-destruction. You have the absolute, unalienable right to protect your peace, your assets, and your future. If the people who share your blood refuse to respect those boundaries, you do not owe them your sanity. You do not owe them your silence, and you certainly do not owe them your future. You simply calculate the exact cost of their audacity, hand them a legally binding invoice, and walk away into a beautiful, quiet life. We are raised on a very specific, deeply ingrained American mythology. It is the belief that the family unit is a sacred, unbreakable sanctuary. We picture holiday dinners, matching sweaters, shared values, and a safety net woven from shared DNA. But as I sit in my Vermont farmhouse today, watching the snow fall gently over the frozen lake and listening to the muffled, joyful laughter of Mason and Harper from the other room, I realize that this mythology is often just a beautifully painted theater set. Behind the curtain, the reality of family can be profoundly transactional. Achieving the peace that now fills my home required me to burn down everything I was taught about family responsibility. In American culture, we place a heavy premium on loyalty. We are told from a young age that blood is thicker than water, that you honor your parents, and that family is the ultimate harbor in a storm. Yet what happens when the harbor is the storm? What happens when the people entrusted to guide and protect you view you merely as a line of credit, an emergency slush fund, a disposable utility? Parenting, at its absolute core, should be an exercise in selfless stewardship. It requires honesty, fairness, and a profound emotional awareness of the small, fragile lives entrusted to your care. My parents, David and Patricia, failed this fundamental test. They operated within a twisted, toxic hierarchy, where my brother Carter was the prized investment and I was the perpetual safety net. They projected a pristine upper-middle-class facade to their country club friends, emphasizing traditional family structures, yet they hollowed out the actual foundation of our home to maintain that illusion. They lacked the emotional awareness to see the damage they were inflicting, not just on me, but on the next generation. When they dumped two shivering, neglected children on my porch to fund a fugitive's tropical escape, they weren't just abandoning their grandchildren. They were abandoning the very essence of what it means to be a family. Raising children requires more than curated photographs and hollow philosophies. It requires the unglamorous, exhausting, deeply beautiful work of being present. It means noticing when a 6-year-old flinches at a dropped spoon and understanding the chaotic environment that created that reflex. It means recognizing the profound trauma of food scarcity and fixing it with an overflowing bowl of fresh fruit on the kitchen island. It means buying the heavy, unbranded down parka instead of the paper-thin designer windbreaker. True family responsibility is rooted in protection. As I navigated the chaotic month of securing legal guardianship, managing a corporate audit, and untangling a web of identity theft, I learned that parenting is an action. It is a daily, relentless choice to shield the innocent from the chaos of the world. My parents and my brother believed that DNA granted them a free pass to exploit and neglect. They believed their titles, grandparent, father, were enough to demand respect. But titles are meaningless without the work. In traditional American family structures, there is a dangerous tendency to sweep dysfunction under the rug for the sake of keeping the peace. We are conditioned to forgive the unforgivable because they are still your family. But true honesty, the kind of honesty required to raise healthy, emotionally secure children, demands that we drag the rot into the light. I had to confront my parents, not with screaming matches or emotional pleading, but with cold, undeniable facts. The spreadsheet, the invoice, the federal fraud reports. These were not just weapons of retaliation, they were instruments of truth. Fairness in a family does not mean everyone gets an equal share of your suffering or your resources. Fairness means holding adults accountable for the damage they cause, ensuring that the burden does not roll down the hill to crush the children at the bottom. By establishing an ironclad financial and legal boundary, I wasn't rejecting traditional family values, I was enforcing them. I was demanding that the people who brought children into this world and the grandparents who claim to love them actually take responsibility for their futures. This brings us to a harsh, deeply uncomfortable truth that goes against everything conventional society preaches. We are told that keeping a family together is the ultimate moral victory. We are taught that estrangement is a failure, a tragedy to be avoided at all costs. But I have come to believe something radically different. Sometimes the most loving, traditional, and protective act a person can commit is to completely destroy their own family. Sometimes, honoring your role as a guardian means becoming a fortress, pulling up the drawbridge and leaving the people who share your blood to drown in the moat of their own making. I did not invoice my parents simply to get my money back. I invoiced them to bankrupt their audacity, to force them to fund the college trust of the children they discarded, and to permanently sever their access to our lives. I broke the family apart so that a real one could finally grow. The journey of navigating toxic family dynamics, finding your voice, and reclaiming your future is rarely easy, and it is almost never clean. But you do not have to walk that path alone. If this journey resonates with the quiet battles you are fighting in your own life, I invite you to subscribe and follow Intimately Told Stories. Join our community, share your own experiences in the comments, and let us continue to explore the messy, beautiful, and triumphant realities of the human experience together. As the evening settles over the Vermont hills and the house grows quiet, I often find myself looking at the heavy oak front door of my farmhouse. I think about the people who are no longer allowed to walk through it. We spend our entire lives trying to figure out where we belong, desperately attempting to fit into the framework of the family we were born into. But perhaps the greatest illusion of all is the idea that we are defined by our roots. We are not a product of the people who created us. We are a product of the boundaries we have the courage to draw. Look closely at your own life, at the obligations you carry, and the silences you endure. Ask yourself, are you building a home? Or are you just paying the rent on someone else's delusion? Blood does not forge a family. It merely provides the raw materials. The truest form of love is knowing exactly when to close the door, turn the lock,